November 9, 1989. Cold air presses against concrete. Floodlights wash the Berlin Wall in a pale, artificial glow. Border guards stand rigid, rifles slung but unfired, unsure of their orders. On the other side, a crowd grows, first dozens, then hundreds, then thousands. Someone shouts. Someone climbs. A hammer strikes concrete. The sound echoes like a gunshot. Then another. And another. In that moment, nothing officially ends. No declaration is read. No surrender signed. And yet, one of the most powerful empires in human history has already begun to die. What follows will take 900 days. History prefers to remember collapse as slow decline, a long fade, a gradual erosion. But that story is comforting and wrong. Empires do not gently retire. They persist far beyond sustainability, surviving on reputation, memory, and fear, until one moment exposes the truth. When that moment arrives, collapse accelerates violently. Systems fail together. Authority evaporates. And what once seemed permanent disappears with shocking speed. Rome fell in 3 days. France fell in 6 weeks. The Soviet Union fell in 900 days. Each believed itself too advanced, too powerful, too essential to fail. Each was wrong. This documentary is not about battles alone, nor about villains or heroes in isolation. It is about systems, financial, military, political, and psychological, and the precise moment when they stop working. It is about why collapse, when it finally comes, does not creep forward but cascades. And it is about a troubling question now emerging in the present tense. What if the United States is no longer declining, but entering its own acceleration phase? August 24th, 410 AD. Before dawn. Rome. The city sleeps under a humid summer sky. Marble streets are quiet. Temples loom in shadow. For 8 centuries, Rome has not fallen to a foreign enemy. Its walls are not just stone, they are myth. But near the Salarian Gate, something is wrong. A door opens from within. Slaves, unpaid, unseen, have made a choice. By sunrise, Visigoth warriors pour through the streets. Gold is ripped from temples. Statues are toppled. Smoke curls above the forum. The eternal city burns, not because it was defeated in battle, but because it could no longer pay its defenders. 3 days later, Rome is broken. The empire does not officially end for another 66 years, but the illusion is shattered forever. Everyone now knows what had once been unthinkable. Rome can fall. That knowledge spreads faster than any army. German artillery opens fire. Panzer divisions roll forward through the Ardennes forest. Terrain the French High Command has declared impassable. Maps are wrong. Assumptions are fatal. Radios crackle with orders that never arrive. France has more tanks, more soldiers, the largest army in Europe. But doctrine lags reality. Generals prepare for the last war, not the one unfolding in front of them. Within days, the front collapses, not from annihilation, but confusion. Units retreat without orders. Officers abandon posts. Refugees choke the roads. On June 14th, German troops march into Paris without resistance. 6 weeks after the invasion begins, France signs its surrender in the same railway carriage where Germany once surrendered in 1918. Power does not vanish gradually. It flips. Across centuries, continents, and ideologies, the pattern repeats. Empires fall not when they are weakest, but when the gap between perception and reality becomes impossible to hide. This is the central paradox of imperial collapse. The stronger the myth of permanence, the faster the fall. Rome's leaders believed their city eternal. French commanders believed their defenses unbreakable. Soviet officials believed control absolute. In each case, decay was visible long before collapse, but politically inconvenient to acknowledge. Warnings were ignored. Reforms delayed. Debts accumulated, financial, military, and moral. And when the system finally broke, it did so everywhere at once. Collapse follows a sequence. First comes denial. Statistics are adjusted. Losses reframed. Problems postponed. The system insists everything is under control. Then comes the credibility break, a single event, or a short chain of events, that reveals authority is hollow. Orders are ignored. Promises fail. The public stops believing. Next is cascade failure. Institutions depend on trust. When trust collapses, so does coordination. Armies hesitate. Markets seize. Bureaucracies freeze. After that comes fragmentation. Power decentralizes. Regions, factions, or interest groups act independently. Unity becomes impossible. Finally, there's freefall, rapid uncontrollable unraveling, followed by a reset, where a new system replaces the old, often under conditions of shock and scarcity. This documentary will trace that sequence, step by step, through Rome, France, and the Soviet Union, not as moral lessons, but as mechanical processes. Because systems do not care about intentions. The architects of these empires were not fools. Roman emperors debased currency to fund defense. French generals fortified borders to prevent slaughter. Soviet leaders pursued reform to save their state. Each decision was rational locally, but systems fail globally. Small compromises accumulate. Temporary measures become permanent. Structural weaknesses are hidden by momentum. And eventually, the machine outruns its ability to correct itself. By the time leaders recognize the danger, the system has already lost the ability to respond. Today, the United States stands at a familiar crossroads. Its power remains vast. Its military unmatched. Its currency dominant. And yet, behind the facade, pressures are mounting. Financial strain, institutional distrust, strategic overextension, political paralysis. None of these alone guarantee collapse. But history shows something more unsettling. Empires rarely fall because of what they lack. They fall because of what they can no longer coordinate. The question is no longer whether decline exists. The question is whether the credibility break has begun. As Rome burned, as Paris fell silent, as the Soviet flag was lowered for the last time, most people believed the system would somehow survive. It didn't. And the most dangerous moment is not collapse itself, but the moment right before it becomes obvious. This is the story of how empires really fall. Empires do not collapse from a single blow. They collapse when systems designed to absorb shocks instead amplify them. The illusion of strength persists until one failure exposes many others, financial, military, political, psychological, failing together. This section dissects how collapse actually works, not as mythology, but as mechanics. The Roman system, money, soldiers, and the cost of empire by the 4th century AD. Rome still looked powerful. Its roads spanned continents. Its laws governed millions. Its legions remained feared. But the empire was already hollowing out from within. Rome's problem was not invasion, it was math. Currency debasement under Augustus. The Roman silver denarius contained over 95% silver. By the 3rd century, emperors repeatedly reduced silver content to fund military pay and state expenses. By 300 AD, coins contained less than 5% silver, often washed in silver over copper cores. This caused hyperinflation, loss of trust in currency, soldiers demanding payment in goods instead of money. When money stops functioning, logistics fail. Military overextension. Rome required over 400,000 troops to guard borders stretching from Britain to Mesopotamia. The cost was enormous. Taxation increased. Landowners hid wealth. Farmers abandoned land. The tax base collapsed. To compensate, Rome increasingly relied on mercenaries, barbarian federates, foreign troops with limited loyalty. By 410 AD, many Roman soldiers defending Rome were Visigoths themselves. The credibility break. Alaric did not defeat Rome in battle. He waited. He demanded gold and grain Rome could no longer provide. When payment failed, loyalty evaporated. Slaves opened the gates. Rome fell not because it was conquered, but because it could no longer enforce its promises. Once the myth of Roman invincibility shattered, provinces stopped complying. Britain seceded. Gaul fractured. Authority fragmented. The empire entered freefall. France 1940. When doctrine fails faster than armies, France in 1940 was not weak. It was misaligned. Strategic blindness. French military planning was built around static defense, attrition warfare, predictable fronts. The Maginot Line symbolized this mindset: massive, expensive, immobile. Germany, meanwhile, embraced speed, decentralized command, combined arms warfare. Blitzkrieg was not just a tactic, it was a systemic disruption. The Ardennes collapse. French intelligence assessed the Ardennes forest as impassable to tanks. That assumption allowed German armor to punch through Sedan in days. Once the breakthrough occurred, communications failed. Orders contradicted reality. Units waited for instructions that never came. No single battle destroyed France. Coordination collapsed. Psychological breakdown. After World War I, French society was traumatized. When Paris was declared an open city and the government fled, the signal was unmistakable. Authority had withdrawn. Soldiers did not lose because they were defeated. They stopped believing victory was possible. France demonstrates a critical rule of collapse. When leadership loses credibility, even intact forces become irrelevant. The Soviet Union. Collapse without invasion. The Soviet Union fell without a war. That alone makes it one of history's most revealing cases. Economic exhaustion. By the 1980s, the USSR faced chronic shortages, stagnant productivity, an arms race it could not afford. Oil prices collapsed in the mid-1980s, gutting hard currency revenue. The state survived on debt, repression, and illusion. Glasnost and perestroika. Gorbachev attempted reform to save the system. Instead, reforms exposed how broken it already was. Once censorship lifted, trust collapsed. Corruption became visible. Legitimacy evaporated. Information itself became destabilizing. The August 1991 coup, the failed coup, was the credibility break. When tanks appeared in Moscow, but soldiers refused orders, everyone understood the truth. The state no longer controlled its own force. Within weeks, republics declared independence. Central authority dissolved. The system fragmented irreversibly. The USSR didn't collapse slowly, it accelerated. The common pattern: 6 stages of imperial failure across Rome, France, and the USSR. Collapse follows the same structure. Denial. Problems are acknowledged privately, but denied publicly. Metrics are manipulated. Optimism is enforced. Credibility. Break. A moment reveals authority is hollow. Orders fail. Promises collapse. Cascade. Failure. Institutions depend on trust. Once trust breaks, failure spreads faster than leaders can respond. Fragmentation. Regions, factions, and interest groups act independently. Unity dissolves. Freefall. Collapse accelerates beyond control. Events outpace decision-making. Reset. A new system emerges, often harsher, leaner, and shaped by crisis. Why America is not exempt. The United States differs in form, but not in physics. Structural strains, unsustainable debt dynamics. Political polarization, disabling coordination. Institutional distrust across government, media, and finance. Military overstretch across multiple theaters. These are not signs of collapse by themselves. They are preconditions. The danger point history shows collapse begins when institutions lose legitimacy. Enforcement becomes inconsistent. Coordination fails under stress. Collapse does not require defeat, only inability to respond coherently. Rome could not pay. France could not adapt. The USSR could not command. The final lesson is unsettling. Empires fall fastest when they believe collapse is impossible. This is not prophecy. It is pattern recognition. And patterns do not predict dates, they predict directions. The acceleration phase is always invisible until it isn't. Every empire believes its ending will be different. Different circumstances, different values, different technology, different people. Each tells itself that history applies to others. Older, cruder, less enlightened societies. Rome believed itself eternal, because it had laws. France believed itself secure because it had fortifications. The Soviet Union believed itself invincible because it had ideology and nuclear weapons. All three were wrong in the same way. They misunderstood how power actually ends. Power does not disappear when armies are defeated or borders crossed. It disappears when systems lose the ability to coordinate reality, when money no longer commands labor, when orders no longer move men, when legitimacy no longer compels obedience. At that point, collapse is not a choice. It is a mechanical outcome. This documentary traced that mechanism across centuries, not to dramatize fear, but to strip collapse of mythology. Empires do not fall because of villains alone. They fall because systems accumulate contradictions faster than they can resolve them. And once resolution fails, time compresses. Rome's collapse was not announced by barbarians at the gate. It was announced by accountants who could no longer balance the books, by soldiers paid in worthless coin, by elites who insulated themselves while the state hollowed out beneath them. When the gates opened in 410 AD, the fall took 3 days, but the system had already failed years earlier. France did not lose in 6 weeks because German tanks were superior. It lost because its institutions were optimized for a world that no longer existed. Command structures froze. Initiative vanished. Confidence evaporated. When belief collapsed, surrender followed faster than bullets. The Soviet Union did not fall in 900 days because of invasion or famine. It fell because once fear disappeared, nothing remained to hold the system together. The moment soldiers refused orders in Moscow, the illusion of central control ended. Republics did not wait. They left. Each case confirms the same lesson. Collapse is not gradual at the end. It is sudden because the system has already crossed a point of no return. What makes this moment dangerous is not weakness. It is misinterpretation. Empires mistake momentum for stability. They mistake scale for resilience. They mistake past success for future immunity. And when warning signs appear, they are rationalized, politicized, or dismissed as temporary. Debt is framed as manageable. Polarization as healthy debate. Institutional breakdown as noise. Loss of trust as cyclical. History shows these explanations persist until the moment they fail together. The United States today still possesses extraordinary advantages: economic scale, military reach, technological capacity, cultural influence. But collapse has never been about raw power alone. Rome had the greatest army on earth. France had Europe's strongest military. The Soviet Union had nuclear parity. What they lacked, at the end, was cohesion. Cohesion is not agreement. It is the ability of institutions to act decisively under stress. It is the capacity to translate authority into action. It is trust, not optimism, not slogans, but functional trust. Once trust erodes, money becomes unstable. Law becomes selective. Authority becomes contested. Coordination becomes impossible. At that point, collapse does not need enemies. It accelerates on its own. The most uncomfortable truth history offers is this: collapse is often invisible to those living inside it, until speed replaces denial. Rome's elites debated theology, while currency imploded. France's generals refined doctrine, while tanks crossed forests. Soviet officials revised 5-year plans, while the Union dissolved. They did not fail because they were blind. They failed because systems punished delay. The 6 stages outlined throughout this documentary: denial, credibility break, cascade failure, fragmentation, freefall, reset, are not metaphors. They are observable phases seen repeatedly across civilizations. Denial lasts the longest. Credibility breaks fastest. Cascade failure spreads instantly. And once fragmentation begins, there is no rewind. This is why collapse feels sudden. Not because it is unpredictable, but because humans underestimate nonlinear change. The question facing the modern world is not whether the United States resembles Rome, France, or the USSR in culture or ideology. It is whether it now shares their systemic constraints. Can it respond quickly to crisis without political paralysis? Can institutions command trust across factions? Can economic promises be honored without accelerating instability? Can authority act decisively when challenged? These questions determine trajectory, not rhetoric. History does not repeat slogans. It repeats structures. There is a temptation, when hearing such arguments, to demand dates, to ask when. History does not work that way. Collapse is not a calendar event. It is a phase transition. Water does not slowly become ice. It reaches a threshold and changes state. Empires behave the same way. What follows collapse is often misunderstood as chaos alone. In reality, collapse is also a reset. New systems emerge. New hierarchies form. New rules replace old ones. But resets are rarely gentle. They are shaped by scarcity, shock, and power struggles. Rome's collapse led to centuries of fragmentation. France's collapse reshaped Europe under occupation. The Soviet collapse reordered global power and left unresolved tensions that still echo today. Resets are never neutral. They reward preparedness and punish denial. This documentary does not argue that collapse is inevitable or that it must look the same everywhere. It argues something more precise and more unsettling. Once systems lose credibility, outcomes accelerate beyond intention. Leaders no longer steer events. Events overtake leaders. At that stage, even good decisions arrive too late. Every empire reaches a moment when history stops asking what it was and starts asking what replaces it. That moment rarely feels dramatic at first. It feels administrative, confusing, fragmented, normal even, until suddenly it isn't. Rome fell in 3 days. France in 6 weeks. The Soviet Union in 900 days. Those numbers are not warnings of speed. They are reminders of compression, how quickly reality changes once belief collapses. The past is not prophecy, but it is precedent. And precedent shows that the most dangerous moment for any empire is not decline. It is the moment it assumes decline will always remain slow. History does not end empires with explosions. It ends them with silence, hesitation, and the realization, too late, that the system no longer responds. And once that realization spreads, collapse no longer needs force. It only needs time.